Hi everyone, this is going to be one of our longer lessons because we've got a whole lot of stuff to cover. When we talk about MLA documentation, we're going to go into when do I actually need to document to avoid plagiarism, and how do I actually document these things correctly, and where do I find that information. So I've posted this particular slideshow to Blackboard under course documents. So after you're done watching the lesson, you can go back in and check this thing out anytime you like. And in that way, I'm hoping that you can use it as a tool along with Purdue OWL to make sure that you're documenting correctly. So let's dive into it. First of all, a big problem that I see in freshman papers is accidental plagiarism. In my eyes, there's really two types of plagiarism. There's deliberate plagiarism, where you've stolen a paper from the internet or you copied and pasted gigantic chunks of stuff from Wikipedia. That's obviously wrong, and I'm going to fail you if you do it. On the other hand, you've got accidental plagiarism, where you're using somebody else's ideas or words without giving proper documentation, and so it ends up looking like you're claiming that they're your own ideas or words, even if that's not what you intend to claim. So when you don't document correctly, it's plagiarism, even if you didn't mean to do it. So obviously, we need to make sure we're documenting correctly, and that means giving credit for any borrowed ideas and any borrowed words. So we'll talk more specifically about when something needs to be documented and when you can get away without documenting it. So, first of all, if you're not sure, if you're sitting there going, oh, is this really something I need to cite? You might as well go ahead and give credit. It's better to give credit and not need it than it is to need it and not give it. So just when in doubt, cite. But more specifically, if you use a direct quote, you've got to give credit. If it's arguable information or opinions that are not your own, we need to give credit because we want to know whose point of view that actually is. It's particularly important in your refutation so that we don't wonder who is talking. Is it you or the guy you're refuting? If you mention information that's not common knowledge, we'll talk about the difference between common knowledge and not common knowledge. And then if you use any kind of statistics or figures that you didn't actually gather. So let's talk more about each of these. Here's something I see a lot. Tom Brady led the New England Patriots to a dramatic fourth quarter comeback in the 2017 Super Bowl. Brady was absolutely unstoppable. The Patriots ended up winning the game in overtime. Well, this is a lot like the hit and run quote that we saw in a previous lesson. We don't know where this information comes from. They've given some credit by putting it in quotes. We know that they're not trying to say those are their words, but we don't actually know whose words they are. So we need to make sure that when we use a direct quote, we say who actually said it. Tom Brady led the New England Patriots to a fourth quarter comeback. Brady was absolutely unstoppable. Smith 25. Well, now we've given some credit, so this is better. I wouldn't call this plagiarism, but it's still not as good as it could be. This becomes an issue of integrating your sources smoothly. We want to make sure the sources are well integrated into the paper, and that's where the quote sandwich comes in. As John Smith, sports writer for the New York Times, put it, Brady was absolutely unstoppable. Now we've got the signal phrase, we've got the quotes, and we've got the parenthetical citation, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. This is a correctly documented source. We've given all the credit that we need for a quote. Now, arguable information or opinions of others. Say you said this: many people today think that getting a degree in a STEM discipline is likely to result in a better job. In fact, degrees in the liberal arts give a broader education that makes candidates more qualified for a wide range of jobs. Well, if you say, in fact, it sounds like we've shifted to your point of view. It sounds like we're getting a they say, I say. They say STEM is going to get you a better job. I say liberal arts is going to get you a better job. Now, if that's your intention, that's fine. But this particular author, it was not his intention. He wanted to show many people's point of view and Fareed Zakaria's point of view. And because he showed Fareed Zakaria's point of view without giving credit, he is actually plagiarizing. So it would be better to look like this. STEM discipline likely to result in a better job. Fareed Zakaria, however, disagrees with this notion. He believes da-da-da-da-da, and then the page numbers it comes from. So if there are points of view that are not yours, we have to say the name of the person whose point of view it is, number one, to give credit and avoid plagiarism, but number two, to make sure that we know who's saying what. We don't want to think it's your point of view when it's actually somebody else's. Next, if the information is not common knowledge. So here's a stat that probably very few people know off the top of their heads. Apple sold 231.22 million iPhones in 2015. Well, how do you know that? There's no way you just knew that when you sat down to write. That's like a red flag for me that you're not giving appropriate credit to a source. So what you need to do is provide either a signal phrase or a parenthetical citation to show where this information came from. It sold 231 million iPhones, and there's the parenthetical citation. Or, according to the statistics gathering website Statista, Apple sold 231 million iPhones. Now, if you said something like the iPhone is really popular, that's common knowledge. But these very specific numbers, dates, things like that, that are not the kind of thing that people know off the top of their head, those are the red flags. Make sure you give credit. Last, statistics and figures that you didn't gather. Someone else did this research. You need to make sure you give that person credit for the research. So this was a statistic taken, I believe, in March of 2017. Donald Trump's approval rating is currently 43%. Well, even if that's true, where did you get this 43% number? That's another red flag. I don't think you went out and did a presidential approval poll. So you need to give credit to the person who did do the poll. So 43%, there's our parenthetical citation, presidential approval ratings, or a signal phrase. According to the most recent Gallup poll, Donald Trump's approval rating is 43%. So be on the lookout for these numbers and other red flags that can indicate that you need to be giving somebody else credit for the information. Now, here's some times that you can actually skip a citation. If it is common knowledge, if it can be found in many places, it's a well-known quote, or if you actually did go out and gather that information. So, though Donald Trump won the Electoral College and thus the presidency, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. Pretty much everybody knows that. That was all over the news, in every newspaper, every magazine, every website, whatever. This is the kind of fact that so many people know that there's no reason to cite a particular source. Just think, if you could walk across a college campus and ask the average educated person the question and they could come up with the answer, then it counts as common knowledge. Now, I know there's dumb people out there. There are some people out there who, if you ask them who the president is, they will say George Washington. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about educated people know the answer, then it probably counts as common knowledge. And most educated people know this particular fact. Information that can be found in many places means that there's so many different locations where you could look something up that there's no point in listing a specific one. So if you're going to be citing the preamble to the Constitution, well, you could find copies of the Constitution in basically every history textbook, every government or politics textbook, posters on the wall in middle school classrooms, the actual Constitution sitting there in the Smithsonian. There's so many different places you could find it that there's no point in listing a particular one. You'd still want to give credit with quotes because it's not your words, but there's no need to cite a particular instance of the U.S. Constitution. Same thing with well-known quotes. Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon. He said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." We've all heard this a million times. No need to say where we got this source. Certain quotes that are just so ubiquitous that everyone knows them, there's no reason to actually give particular credit to a source, though we do need to give credit to Neil Armstrong for his words. So use quotes and a signal phrase that says Neil Armstrong. Last, if you actually do a survey, over 2/3 of the people I surveyed thought that Kim Jong-un was the president of China. The remaining third thought he was the kid from Up. If you go out and do that survey and that's what it finds, you find that's perfectly fine. No need to give anyone else credit. You just mention that you were the one who did the research. By the way, we should all know he's the president of North Korea, not China. Okay, so let's say you've gone through the previous few slides and you've determined, yes, I do need to give credit to a source. I do need to document. How am I going to do this? The last secret word for today is be. Well, there are at least 2 and probably all 3 things that are going to be required for any time you want to document. You're always going to have an entry on the Works Cited page. So if you mention a source in your paper, it's going to have to appear on the Works Cited page. And then there's always going to be one of these 2, either a signal phrase or a parenthetical citation, and many times you're going to end up having both. So minimum of 1, 2, possibly all 3 of these things going to appear. So let's talk more specifically about them. If you need a parenthetical citation, you need to know what goes in it. So what goes in the parenthetical citation depends on a couple of things. First of all, do you have a signal phrase? If you're using quote sandwiches, if you're integrating your summaries and paraphrases correctly, you're going to have a signal phrase most of the time. I would encourage you to use signal phrases liberally because number one, it helps integrate the sources into the paper smoothly. Number two, it makes sure that you avoid plagiarism. And number three, it makes your paper longer and makes it easier to get to that page limit. So you should probably have a signal phrase, but there may be some times, particularly when you're using statistics or something like that, where you end up not putting a signal phrase. So first of all, ask yourself, do I have a signal phrase? Second of all, ask yourself, do I have page numbers? Some sources have page numbers, books, magazines, newspapers, things like that. Other sources do not, TV shows, websites, interviews. If you have page numbers, you're going to handle the citation differently than if you do not. So this is probably the most useful page in the entire slideshow, so please pay attention to it. It's a chart that I made that you can look at to determine whether or not you need a parenthetical citation and what should go in it. So if you've got a signal phrase, according to Joe Smith of the New York Times, and a page number, all that you have to do is put the page number in the parenthetical citation. No need to put his name because you've already said his name in a signal phrase. If you don't have a page number, according to a recent interview on TV with Joe Smith, well then there's nothing to put in here because there's no page number because it's a TV interview and we already said his name in the signal phrase. No need for a parenthetical citation in that case. Now say there's no signal phrase. Donald Trump's approval rating is 43%. Well, if you got that from a source with page numbers, you would need to include the source's name and the page number. Whereas if there were no page numbers, it came from a website or whatever, then just the source's name. So remember to ask yourself, signal phrase, no signal phrase, page number, no page number, and then find the appropriate one on the chart. That's what goes in your parenthetical citation if you have one. Now, most of the time, if you need to put the author information in the parenthetical citation, it's going to be his name, because the point is what appears in your parenthetical citation matches up with the first word or couple of words of the works cited entry. That way, when we're reading your paper, we can look and go, oh, Smith, flip to the works cited page, find that source for ourselves if we want. So most of the time, it's going to be an author's name. Occasionally, there is no author's name if, for example, it's written by an editorial board or something like that. In that case, you move to the next thing on the works cited page, which is almost always the title of the article in quotes because it's a title. So author most of the time. If no author, you move on to title. In very rare circumstances, you might not have either of these. That's when you would move on to the title of the journal or the title of the website or something like that. But that hardly ever happens. So if you find yourself putting the title of a website in a parenthetical citation, 98% chance you're doing it wrong. Look again and see if you have an author's name or an article title. If you want to look at the details, make sure you check out Purdue OWL. It provides more specifics of the MLA documentation. One more thing to remember. Your works cited page should match the actual paper that you've just written. There should be a 1-to-1 ratio between sources cited in the paper and sources that appear on your works cited page. So if you list a source on your works cited page, but you didn't actually use it in your paper, that doesn't make any sense. If you mention a source in your paper and it doesn't appear on your works cited page, then you're not giving appropriate credit. So say there's 7 sources mentioned in your paper, there should be 7 entries on your works cited page. It always is a 1-to-1 ratio. Make sure it matches up. Okay, I know that was a lot to cover. I'm sorry to keep you so long, but now it's done. You can look at this PowerPoint again if you need extra help, and of course you can always ask me. Double check with Purdue OWL if you're unsure about anything, and let me know if you have any questions.